Unboxing TNT, a podcast that unpacks contemporary national issues and advocates for more effective representation and innovative solutions related to those challenges facing all of us. Tune in for fact-driven insights and stakeholder perspectives, and learn how you can do your part to make a real difference. Subscribe on YouTube and follow on social media for updates. Now, let's get started with this episode of Unboxing TNT with your hosts, Anarion Mason and Rudolph Hanamji.
Welcome to Unboxing TNT Episode 5, Education Part 1. I am Rudolph Hanamji, CEO here at our portal for accountability and representation of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm so pleased to be joined again by my co-host, Anarion Mason, our COO. Anarion, Episode 5.
It is episode 5, Rudolph. Can you believe we're quite on 5? This felt like just yesterday we started. And again, as we always do, we remind our viewers and our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel, our part, as well as to follow along on Facebook and Instagram. And now we have a TikTok account. So you can look at us on TikTok as well, where you can see updates and get information on a regular basis. So our topic today, Rudolph, is part 1 actually of education.
Yes. Part 1, because education, of course, is such a broad and deep topic, as folks can imagine. It touches everyone's lives. And, Dr. Eric Williams, the former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, told us so many years ago that the future of our nation is in the school bags of our students. And of course, as you know, Anarion, I am a proud graduate of Queen's Royal College. I sat in the same classrooms where that gentleman sat many years before me. That's why I chose this background today for our discussion, because I know, like you, our secondary and primary school lives really informed who we are today. What about you? Is that a picture of which of your schools?
Well, interestingly enough, that is the graduation ceremony from 2024 at the Faisabad Anglican Secondary School, where I spent the first 5 years of my secondary school life. And if it wasn't for this school, Rudolph, I wouldn't have been where I am today. I can still remember, back then, listening to Miss Telemark at assembly on a Friday morning. She always told us, remember, the weekend begins at 2:30 when school ends. So whilst we're in school on a Friday and people have this notion, the weekend starts at Friday, she always reminded us at the end of the school day, then your weekend begins. Because as citizens, well, as students actually, we adopted the philosophy of the very first Prime Minister, which is this education is the key to success, where he put that quote in his very speeches. How did that quote go again? I believe it's the success of the country is in the book bags, the children's book bags.
Correct. Yes. And like you're saying, our teachers really would have left these nuggets of wisdom with us, because they didn't only train us for school and passing exams, but they also trained us for life. And I recall as well, one of my principals, or my first principal at Queen's Royal College, actually, Mr. Jordan, he was a former student of the college as well, and he had gone abroad to study, I believe, at Oxford University. And he always maintained, whether it was at the morning assemblies or the graduation ceremonies, achievement day functions, that students had a responsibility to build themselves into the citizens that their parents and teachers expected them to be. So he inculcated that in us, that we had to work with what was being invested in us. We had to be focused and committed and apply ourselves so that the dream of your parents and your teachers, because they are the ones that are guiding you and giving you access to information and knowledge and trying to build your principles, value systems, and your own dreams in a way, influence those dreams. You really owed it to them and yourself to make the best life that you could. And it wasn't always about the academics. At Queen's Royal College, I know that it we are committed to all round education development. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why over the years persons may find that the college doesn't always win as many scholarships as other institutions might. But I can tell you, having gone to school there firsthand, that that wasn't really what we were focused on. Yes, it's great to have your name in the papers, but I think also with your college, your other college, Anarion, you'll
Yeah,
also focus on extracurricular activities.
of course. And it's sad to see actually that over the past couple of days we lost to Fatima for the NGC Football Cup. It's
Well,
been
I
first time in a while we've lost.
I will join with you in commiserating because to lose to them certainly is a tragedy. I speak from personal experience, so. But we have to be kind to others and give them space.
Yeah, we let them feel a little important
And,
sometimes.
and if you weren't in this conversation, or if we weren't having this conversation, I'm sure we'd be saying the same thing about each other. So
Correct.
all's fair in the intercultural prestige world, right? But that's why we're having this conversation, because we're joking a little bit about it. But I know we're going to get into that very topic shortly. But Anarian, like me, you are a lifelong learner. I mean, when I met you, that was definitely one of the qualities and characteristics that impressed me, and I drew into because I am like that. I mean, up to a few months ago, as you know, I finally completed my LB. That was a 20-year journey, but in between that and my first degree, I've committed to a constant trajectory of certifications and not even formal education. I mean, you read a lot. You're
Right.
always sharing with me things that you come across your desk. I can tell you that my love for learning and education began with my grandparents and my wider family. My
Hmm.
grandparents always believed in the opportunities education brings. Now, they were more traditional, so obviously they focused on formal education. But like my grandmother, I would have shared this with you as well. She went back to university after having her four children and became a pharmacist. My grandfather was a teacher himself, and then he went to London to study law. Where did you get your love for learning from?
Well, it comes from a quote that I heard in my early years. As you know, I grew up in Purple Dragon, and Professor Don Jacob, he taught us so many things, and he didn't reinvent the wheel. He used things that was already in the sphere. And one of his famous persons to quote was Mahatma Gandhi, where that
Okay.
quote was that live as if you were to die tomorrow and learn as if you were to live forever. The
Powerful.
reason being is person he used to always say he's not an expert or he's not the best, but he's an excellent beginner.
Oh, I
And
like that.
that kind of stuck with me from an early age. And yeah, I always took the opportunity to learn, continue learning. As you said, it's not always about certification. It's about reading, listening to documentaries, and learning things that have impacted us in some way or the other.
And I will tell you as well that even though I have curiosity behind me, I went to Rima Boys RC school, and I will never forget some of my teachers like Mr. Manet, Miss Isaacs. and Mr. Garcia, the principal. I remember someone from the. I mean, obviously, I was. These are patches of memories, but we were having class downstairs in the open because at that time in Boys RC, they had actually set up a classroom in a space that was next to the talk shop or the cafeteria, as some people might call it, and it was so it was not an actual classroom. We had the benches set up in that space, and after class, the benches would be moved. So during lunch and recess time, people would actually play there in that area or congregate. So we were out there one afternoon having class. Apparently, someone from the Ministry of Education visited, and they were very upset with Mr. Manet because he had given us a book, The Pearl by John Steinbeck. I still have my copy of that book to this day. He had asked us to read that book, even though it was not on the curriculum, and they were upset because that was seen as a secondary school book. And now Mr. Manet used all the words in the English language, including the very purple, green, orange, red ones. And, and that is, I think, what made me remember that interaction, because he told that ministry official to stop undermining or undervaluing the capacity of his students, and he told them in a very rich way. So my love for reading and that belief that even if you educate yourself informally, it would still provide a benefit for you in your life is really ingrained in me.
Right. And again, if you're looking back at the primary school level, I went to Sapara Root KPA School, which stands for Career Punt Association. And
Uh-huh.
just like you all, we actually had classrooms, but different classes, so the different teachers had specific days and specific times that they took their classes outside. And what we had was like a semicircle around an almond tree.
Wow,
And
that sounds beautiful.
that's yeah, and that's where I think I developed a passion for the environment and for tree planting and things like that, because when we go, we used to raid the tree, we used to climb up on the tree and pick the almonds and whatnot. And it always used to be fun out under the space in the open air learning something. Whether it was mental or spelling or different things, we would have
Yes.
sat down around that tree from first year straight up to standard 5. 7 years we learned and we went around that tree, and it breaks my heart now that the school has developed so much that the tree was removed to put a multi-purpose hall and a library.
Wow. You see,
But
that's the balancing issue. It reminds me of the quote we selected from Dr. Cujo, where he said
mhm,
education is not just about knowledge, it is about cultivating the mind, opening doors to new worlds, and realizing our true potential. And having a class in that type of setting. And mind you, we didn't have air conditioned classes back then. The first time I had an air conditioned class, Anarion, I was in upper sixth form by that time. So I had had almost 13 years of unair conditioned class. Although I did live in Toronto for some time as a child, and I remember those classrooms being air conditioned. But that's a different story. The point is, I could imagine, as you're intimating, when you sat down there and in with the beauty around you and the air sort of blowing across your desk and your face, I could imagine how your brain started imagining different things and engaging with the class in a different way. And
yeah,
that is how we
I
can use
agree.
that's how we can assist in cultivating open minds, right? With approaching education in those different ways.
Right, I agree. And we've experienced quality education at both our primary and secondary levels, Rudolph. And then we went on to university where, again, we developed that passion and that drive, both you and myself, as well as many other citizens. Now, I know you know that I'm a stickler for the United Nations goals. And clearly, as you can see up in front of you, we are not where we're supposed to be in regards to quality education for all. And to me, that's sad. It's sad that in back in the 90s and the 80s when we were in primary school, it has
Yes.
changed. We have dropped from where we were to where we should be now, so many decades later.
Just for
And
the benefit of the viewers, sorry to cut across, explain to them the key that they're seeing here.
okay,
So this is
so
an orange, right? Why is that?
right. So this is orange. The orange indicates that there's significant challenges remaining to achieve quality education for all. The fact that you see two dots next to it means there's no information available indicating whether we have plateaued, whether we're
Wow.
digressing, or whether we're progressing. So that information we need to move that up. But in all, also considering quality education, there are some other goals that deals with that aligns together with it, such as gender equality, such as no poverty,
Hmm.
um, decent work and economic growth, as well as infrastructure.
Right. And
All of
even
those,
good health and well-being. And
correct.
that's the beauty of this type of model is that everything intersects. But yes,
In some way
you're
or the
making a
other.
point.
So we can't only look at just stating the education system has failed or is flawed. There are multiple layers that we need to attack and to understand why
Hmm.
this specific goal is in the that stage of having to be still have significant challenges remaining. And here at Unboxing TNT, you know we're all about tackling multiple layers.
Yes. And I know
So,
that this, of course, forms part of one of our main projects, one of our main six projects, which you are spearheading. Perhaps you provide a quick uh, buzz on the project.
so the project that you're referring to is the Inspire 360 or the I360, where that project deals with the 17 goals. What it is expecting persons to do, or what we're looking for our call to action, is actually having 17 individuals or 17 teams that deal with each specific goal working together.
And Anarian, that is so important about bringing younger persons in particular and teaming them up with older experienced individuals to take ownership of these goals in a real way. And in listening to you and when we were preparing, we both commented on the fact that education was in orange. I made the case to you that unfortunately I think that we're in red because the young people who we would like one day to take up these leadership roles and to become part of projects like Inspire 360, they have had to go through things that some of us probably never imagined we would have been seeing in Trinidad and Tobago. And this image really highlights the intersectionality that we were talking about earlier, where the goal that assesses justice and peace is also not yet in green. And when we have issues of crime and criminality directly impacting the school system in this way, and this is only, of course, what has been reported, what made the news, but it makes me wonder if in other schools across Trinidad and Tobago if children are dealing with these types of issues, Anarion. I mean, I don't remember anything like this in my primary school, and quite frankly, at QRC, I could count the number of major fights that the boys had. I think we must have had three major fights in the 7 years that I was there. Uh, and discipline, production, and tolerance, with, of course, three of those watchwords, three things that made their way into almost everything that we did and we were taught. I just breaks my heart.
Well, likewise, in both schools that I attended at the secondary level, I and all can count maybe on one hand the amount of major incidents or fights that there were. And no, we didn't grow up knowing this. So the question now becomes, what is causing this? What is the current state of analysis behind things? And as you know, every year in late September, early October, we have a national budget that is read where education is one of the top three allocations.
Yes.
And Rudolph, it's disheartening to know that we have so much of funds going into education, yet we haven't achieved quality education for all. We still have persons bringing knives and weapons into schools. What? This is madness.
And perhaps the reason is, of course, as we do here on Unboxing TNT, where the reason when you look behind the figures, you see perhaps why it's not having the effect that we require.
Well, this next graph that you showed basically highlights the amount of money that is allocated towards education, and then the how much is actually spent behind recurring budgets as well as development. And as you can clearly see, the blue is very
Mhm.
minute compared to the green, where the green shows your recurring budget and the blue is development. So we're spending more on, let's say, light bulbs than making things better, than providing better infrastructure, better technology and equipment. So
Yes.
that's what we needs to be done to, let's say, improve across the board. What happens? Now, you and I both went to prestige schools where we have functioning alma maters that take up roles in the development
Alumni
of the
groups,
school.
yes. Alumni
Correct.
group, yes.
But non denominational schools and government schools, you barely find them existing.
Yes, that is a very important inflection. And it's sometimes taken for granted. Like people compare apples with oranges, but without that support network and reinvestment in the colleges, you can only imagine the deficiencies that would have been in existence, even at the prestige level. And of course, we have our own issues. We have talked about this openly, even though we are beneficiaries of a prestige school education. We would like
Mhm.
to see a Trinidad and Tobago where every school is prestige.
Well, that brings forward so many models that are working throughout the world. Yet here in Trinidad and Tobago, we still have that standardized testing. And that being said, Rudolph, we are seeing here on this infographic over between years 2017 to 2021, which is a 5-year period,
Yes.
that our mathematics score at the SEA level has dropped from an average of 58 per student to 46.8. So now we went from barely passing to barely failing.
And
English, which is our native
wow.
language, we've gone from 63 to 56. The
No,
English language, the essay writing. I know you want to say something. I just want to run through the graph
go
and
fin- yes,
we'll
because
we'll discuss.
it really is alarming.
The English language and the creative aspect is fluctuating, which you can expect based on person's reading and how they interpret things, that creativity tends to fluctuate. But the two main things, Rudolph, maths and English, which we look at in SCA and in the CSEC level, is has dropped. So I allow you to itemize and to
No, I was
remunerate
just
now.
going to say that again, being active at the college, we have seen reports and been presented with information where children are entering secondary school and they are not proficient, or at least are not at the level of proficiency that is required to even begin first form. And a number of the students have had to undergo remedial training at the first form
Mhm,
level, Anarion. So they're passing the exam, the SE exam, but they are not necessarily prepared for what is to come. And that is that definitely will have a through line with similar results at the CSEC level, because we know that throughout there's going to be some common factors we're going to unbox shortly. But if you are starting with children who are not yet at the basic levels of numeracy and literacy, entering a secondary school system that has a number of other layers packed into it, and introducing the types of subjects that are not taught in the same way that they would have been accustomed to in the primary school level, then there's obviously going to be a transition issue. And the way that the CSEC exams are graded are very different from the SEA. Now, in my time, we did common entrance, and I can tell you that that transition was difficult, even for some of us who were high performers. So, when you look at the performance again in English and math, so you're starting with what I would say to be below average performance generally at the SE level. That
mhm.
is continuing all the way up to the fourth and fifth form levels, because students who attain 5 subjects with English A and mathematics, I mean, look at that number, it's decreased over the years. And while there was a spike in 2023, we're still nowhere close to where I would like to envision my country to be. I think we should be in the high 60s to 70s, because again, we do make allowance for the fact that there will always be some mitigating factor, whether it's a personal challenge, a disability, learning challenges, and other things that intervene that are beyond the student's control or that of the teacher. But we definitely can do better. We have to do better if we really want to achieve first world developed status and meet those UN SDG goals. I
Of
mean,
course.
look,
Of
while you're sharing, I'll just go on to the Cape. But yeah, what are your thoughts? I mean, we all went through this system or some degree of some variation of it.
correct. And it's disheartening to know that. But the question I would now like to ask, and I know we may discuss this at another date, is are the teachers adequately equipped to deal with students who enter at a mediocre level or a subpar level? So, for example, we're discussing that persons are now borderline on the pass mark, whether it's 50
Yes.
below 50. Are the teachers now capable of doing that? Were they trained enough at their tertiary level in education to deal with multiple layers of persons? So you may have in one school persons who failed maths, persons who passed maths, persons who excelled at maths entering into the space. And the know-how on how to break down to reach every child is important. Additionally, by conditioning yourself or
Hmm.
children being conditioned from the primary school level to pass an exam is not doesn't sit right with me.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Well, maybe go ahead, finish your point.
that being said, you enter secondary school now, where it's not just maths and English and essay writing. You have geography, integrated science, you have French, you have Spanish, so many different subject areas that you don't know how to prepare for. But don't take my word alone for it, because last year at the National Youth Parliament, the debate was on the SEA examinations, whether it should be abolished or amended to reduce that standardized testing. The reports can be found out of the National Youth Parliament. We don't need to go into that per se. But things like stress, mental stress on the students, um, being stigmatized if you do pass at the school, you're not all that well, and you put that negative feeling in them from a young age. So now all they know is that. And Albert Einstein said it well
Hmm.
when he said that if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will
Yes,
always fail.
always fail. That you've just raised such a seminal consideration in how we look at the education system, and it's easy for people to judge children and their performance. I've heard adults say things like, "Oh, the children are not applying themselves. They're not focused. They're distracted by digital technologies, digital platforms, and other technologies." But Anarian, 2,800 children dropping out of school in the 2020 to 2022 period. Now, yes, we understand that COVID-19 would have had an unique impact, but it makes me wonder how many students have dropped out over the last decade, and have we as a country been able to implement the correct tracer studies to continue working with those students so that even though they may have exited the formal education sector, have they been assisted and empowered to go into the informal or maybe tech voc areas so that they can become equally or equitably positive contributors to society and have an equitable opportunity to fulfill their own potential. And these kinds of data points do worry me. But at the same time, it's not only on the public sector. I think, as we suggested earlier, our parents has so much of a positive impact on us that you also have to start looking now at what is happening nationally at a parenting level. Because I have friends who have young children, and I can easily compare and contrast an argument. And parenting in today's world is certainly much more complex and challenging, expensive than
Of course,
parenting when we were kids.
of course it is. And you've highlighted the national parenting policy. Now, we have a policy, and to me, Rudolph, we have a policy for everything under the sun in Trinidad.
We do, we do.
The question is it being implemented? Is it being is it transparent, and is it being monitored and evaluated, whether it is things are working or not working, whether there needs to be restructure, what takes
Hmm.
place?
Hmm.
So you're sharing this document, and this is the first time I'm seeing it.
And in this document, an important question was asked that, again, some people may take for granted just because it's obvious, right? Why is
Mhm.
parenting important? And the committee that designed this policy presented five key reasons. One, they found that there was insufficient and ineffective communication within some families. I mean, again, these things, when you think about them, are not necessarily rocket science, but we sort of allow it to pass over, and we focus on whatever is out there in the ecosystem or in front of us. There's also poor and at times abusive methods of discipline, poor
Right.
socialization skills in some instances, the negative influence of the media, and the changes in community and societal values. So, if parenting is not effective, these variables are going to have a disproportionate impact on how children behave and how they approach schooling.
So you seem to have had read aspects or excerpts from the report. So I would like to ask a question,
Hmm.
and you may be able to advise whether it was said in the report or not. Is the cost of living taken into consideration where we have marginalized persons, or we have parents, single parents, or even households working paycheck to paycheck, and parents are not around to be able to guide their children to the right direction?
So the national parenting policy,
Mm-hmm.
it only touched the surface of those issues. It did recognize that there was, of course, going to be variance in the capacity of parents to treat these challenges because not all families are equal, not all parents are equipped. I mean, some of them are themselves products of bad parenting. And even in the
Right.
cases where some parents know better, to your point, can they afford? I mean, the Children's Authority issued a report a few years ago that almost 1,000 children had to be taken into their care in a small island developing state like ours. That number is alarming because that means there are 2,000 parents who are unable to care for their children, and that suggests other breaches in the social fabric when it comes to families and children and parenting, because if you have 2,000 parents, you
Mm,
then have 4,000 grandparents or 2,000 extended family member potential for extended family, and if that is
correct.
also falling down, then the breach is wider than you think.
It's it's alarming to think of that figure. It really
Because
is. It
each
trickles
you
up though.
it's so, I mean, because again, the math is simple. Each child has two parents. Each of those parents has two parents. So
Right.
you now, yes, you make leeway that some people pass away, they may have migrated, other
Mm-hmm.
people may not be the type of parent that you want to be in the child's life. These things happen, but
Right.
in my experience, I most of the people that I went to college with, they had influence from both of their parents, even though in some cases their parents were separated. And not all of us, but many of us had interactions with at least two out of our four grandparents. So it's a very disturbing trend. But if
Right.
we don't address poor parenting, then there is going to be a natural correlation, and in this case, a causation effect. Because you know the saying, correlation does not equate to causation. But in this case, enough science and data shows that where parenting fails, you have an increase in school violence, because the other thing that comes along with poor parenting is, of course, bullying and arguing.
Of
That is
course.
learned behavior.
It is, whether it's from the parents or from the community or media. It does happen. And most recently we tend to see, whilst there are videos circulating in the public space of school fights and persons being ganged up on,
Yes. Yeah.
We live in the digital age where there's cyberbullying as well, Rudolph. And that takes a mental toll on children.
Incredible point. Incredible point.
Because let's look at, take for example, as a mother or a father. Let's look at the
Mhm.
ideal situation. You have a mom and a dad who went both are going to
Yes.
work from 8 to 4. School for secondary school finishes at 2:30. So you have that hour and a half gap before the parents even leave work to reach back home. What are these kids doing? They're on their devices. They may
Yes.
be communicating with friends. They're in a WhatsApp chat and things like that. And it's as simple as saying you don't fit this magazine design. Your let's say your size or
Hmm.
too bigger than what is deemed normal, and then you have other persons telling you about this. That child now start to feel depressed. They feel like if they're not attractive, they don't want to starve themselves. And Rudolph, a couple days ago we well, not celebrated, we commemorated World Suicide Day. And within the
Yes.
Caribbean and Latin America, a report coming out of the
Yes.
United Nations, the highest percentages of suicide among both men and women were between the ages of 15 and 25.
That is tragic. I knew that there were data to suggest young people were impacted by issues disproportionately, but I didn't realize the number was that high.
And if you think about it logically, between the ages of 15 and 25 is when you're Form 4, Form 5 into university, where
Yes.
your social settings help develop who you are and who you are going to be in society. So, by these bullying activities, that is where it comes from. It stems from there. It may have other
Yes.
factors to
Yeah.
play, but you're more around your peers than your family on a regular basis.
Well, Anarian, without that social network to support you, that familial network, I could tell you firsthand as somebody who was a victim of bullying, it is difficult. And thankfully, I had teachers, friends, and family to hold my hand and to counsel me. 73% of respondents reported verbal bullying in this study that was done by Silver Lining Foundation a couple years ago. And
Right.
physical bullying, of course, is part and parcel of that. It's obvious that it will grow into that type of both mental and physical turmoil for some children. And the major issue around all of that is why we are unpacking these layers. Each of them, each layer has a negative impact on what is happening in our education system, and it's a lot to deal with. And on top of that, I know as an engineer yourself, you have a particular interest in the plant and equipment.
Well, as you can see, how many schools and children are affected here. You see, when schools, the ministry allocates money to development, and we have already identified that such a small percentage from the budget goes into the development.
Yes.
You now have schools that have contractors who are not finishing work on time. Take St. George's College, for example. It's been out of commission for what, 2 years? And the minister told them that they would have been prepared to
Yes.
open the school on September 2nd. Yeah, the 2nd of September.
Hmm.
Now she's begging for the 17th of September to give an extension. But look at this, Rudolph. We already have students who are failing and doing poorly in exams. And now
Yes.
I can speak for myself because my transition between Form 5 and Form 6, I had gotten dengue and I was
Okay.
hospitalized for almost
Okay.
6 weeks. And
Wow.
based off of that, I started school 6 weeks late. Did I mean I
Hmm.
caught up because I had friends there who were sending me work, who visited me at the
Yes.
hospital, And they explain to me what's going on, who's the new lecturers, who's the teachers, things like that. But when it is you have students, no classes going on. I was one individual trying to catch up, but now you have 40, 50 students who can't catch up at all per class. What becomes then? They are now backward compared to the entire curriculum
Yes.
throughout across the board. So the students at St. George's who can't start school for the next 2 weeks, when students at QRC and Presentation and Naprima and
Mm-hmm.
Fatima and these other
Mm-hmm.
schools start on time, they are now backward dynamically in that regards.
And these are all the layers that people have to consider when assessing our policy and policy implementation. I mean, simple thing to add into the mix for some people would be accessing their books for school. So let's keep adding layers now. Let's say you have a student who is not fully prepared from the primary school level. They've had to deal with parenting issues and others at such a young age. They then enter the secondary school. There's no proper transition for them. They can't uh, they can't properly uh, socialize and acclimatize to that environment. They then may have to deal with some form of bullying. On top of that, they can't access the books or all of the books. You're dealing with the problems that you have raised in terms of their school may not be fully equipped or they are operating in substandard classrooms. In today's world, air conditioning seems to be a mandated basic facility amenity. Not all. So you're layering and layering. How do we expect to really get the best outcomes in this complex and fragmented ecosystem? It is we have to stop this and break the cycle because apart from textbooks, I know this is a pet peeve of yours. We don't talk about digital access, the digital divide.
Right. You see, what the UN did during the pandemic is that they gave out devices to persons who would have not been able to access online classes, who would have not have devices. So the UN came to the rescue for the education system in Trinidad and Tobago during the COVID-19 pandemic when we had the lockdown in 2020. And from the graph before, you would have seen most schools and students were displaced during the 2020 and the 2021
Yes.
in school lockdown and restricted movements. So we commend the United Nations for doing this. However, as a nation that spends hundreds of millions on education, we shouldn't have had the need to
No,
ask someone to step in to do this for us.
because it's not sustainable, right? And I know that's where you're going with it.
Yeah, it's not sustainable. If today, tomorrow we have another outbreak, God forbid, knock on wood,
Hmm.
are we going to now beg the United Nations to help? Are we going to seek aid from other international organizations? What is our contingency plan for the next couple of years to ensure that
Yes.
there is effective learning throughout? Do
And
we So, if you remember back in the partnership government, they gave out laptops to all students entering from Form 1. Why weren't those laptops handed down and the persons got to keep them? So, if it
well,
is you entered Form
again,
1, mhm,
another public policy that wasn't properly thought through, and even the current administration brought back at some degree. However, the management of the laptops, the transportation of the laptops, the maintenance, the upgrading, the license fees,
right,
as citizens, we have to be much more active and we have to take a critical approach, a constructively critical approach to these policies because, as Malala's quote below says, one teacher, one book, one pen can change your world. And in these days, you have to add to that one laptop or one mobile device can change your world, right?
Correct, because we're entering the world, the digital world. Actually, the digital world is already taking us
It's
by
already
storm.
here, yes.
I
And
remember there was a symposium, I think, where an educated person stood up. I'm not going to call no names, I'm not going to say the symposium.
mhm.
However, the individual asked or said that children are on their smartphones and their devices looking at pornography, Rudolph. That's what the
Well,
individual intimated by person spending screen time.
but any of us who are honest with ourselves, the majority of us, I'm sure that we would have done the same thing. The point is, obviously, there were enough interventions in most of our lives where distractions or things that are not productive became minimal, and we were able to refocus on plowing ahead. Not all of us, again, I have friends who are not formally educated, but they have built a career for themselves in other fields. They're self and they do well, but again, it requires that level of discipline, that support network, and
That
and
stems from the parenting.
it goes back to the parenting and the teachers, of course, because teachers are co-parents. But it's interesting, these debates that we have at the national level. You spoke earlier about what the youth parliamentarians' position was on the
Mhm.
SEA, and the
Right.
committee that was set up by the administration to look at SEA and other aspects of education in Trinidad and Tobago. They haven't yet issued, at least I wasn't able to find the final report. But the chairman, he made an interesting intervention. From apparently from their findings, the exams are not the problem. So I'm willing to go down the road a little bit with him, because if you correlate the SEA to a CSEC or a CAPE exam, the exam by itself in a vacuum may not be the problem. Meaning the exam might be structured quite well. It's testing for the right application of
Hmm.
knowledge. It is uh,
The
executed
exam is not the
properly.
problem. Correct.
The exam is not the problem. But what we have been able to unpack so far on this episode are all of the other layers that are affecting the output, which is really, you want children to be educated. And we're not talking about A grades and honors. We're talking about learning, genuine learning, that is
Hmm.
really at the end of the day what you want out of education. Isn't that the reason why we are encouraging people to go to some form of schooling?
Well, yeah, and as you know, as you mentioned earlier on in the episode as well, we advocate for all schools to be prestigious schools. That way, you reduce the stress placed on students and things like that. And I think by doing that, think for example, if you have a project at your job and you have no stress, everything runs smoothly, you know that at the end of the day, this target is being met. Wouldn't you not wonder and you'll get things done, you'll be happier?
Of course, that is what facilitates success, the enabling ecosystem, and your entire feeling, your mind space. It's not just the knowledge that you have. And we have invested billions of dollars, as you know, in our
Right.
tertiary education system. But recent reports state that 70% of our university graduates have migrated. The brain drain is unreal. And in other words, that 70% of that $7 billion
Hmm.
invested in other parts of the world.
Well, that's sad, but I am still glad to a point that Trinidad is making a name in the international space. However,
Well,
how
that's
do
one way of looking at it, yes.
we gotta be optimistic because if we take everything too serious, I might grow here and
Well,
it'll become gray.
well, Nelson Mandela said education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. We were talking earlier about violence in schools. I think you were the one who told me the origin of this quote. It had something to do with violence, didn't it?
I believe so. I really can't remember at this point in time.
But at the end of the day, the point is that we do have a number of challenges in our education system, and we had said at the beginning of this episode that the reason we had to split education into a series was because of how complex these issues are. And
Of course.
I mean, again, you have so many citizens commenting, and there's a commonality in terms of the findings, whether they are at a technical public policy level in academia or just the average citizen like this person who wrote into the Guardian a couple of years ago. And basically all the 6 points that he raised there, I think, are still relevant so many years later. We spoke about the parental supervision. You mentioned inequality, the fact that there are now more single parents or sole guardians, age
Right.
of the parents, the fact that some parents did not plan to have their children. This is that entire issue of unwanted, unloved children, and then fatherless children as well. I know you spoke to that earlier as well. The importance of having the right role models in the way that children are socialized. These are
Agree.
not easy issues, Nars. These are very, very complex matters. However, as you said, I challenge everyone to convert cynicism to optimism. I think we can solve these challenges.
Well, yeah, we spent 7 billion on Gate, and we should have the proper persons here who can do this. But I think that's the time we have today. So we invite our viewers to join us a part two of our education series, where we will be unboxing the required policy interventions to enable our education system and all stakeholders to achieve their full potential. And we may have some guests attending on that show, Rudolph.
Yes, I am looking forward to that part 2 episode of this education series because, as former First Lady of Trinidad and Tobago, Zalia Hassan Ali said, and this is particularly for the younger people out there, students listening in, and even others, share this message with them. As she said, you students must realize that you are all uniquely worthy and you are special to your family, your parents, your teachers, your school, and your community. So, Anarion, as we say, they have their part to do. So, as do teachers, ministers of government, parents, and the virtual parents, the public agencies, the private
Right.
sector. Because if I do my part and
And
you do
you
your
do your
part,
part. Together we
then
do
together we do our
our
part.
part. Well,
So
thank you
thank you
again.
very much.
And as usual, Rudolph, lovely conversation. We shall see each other next week.
May our viewers remain safe and remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media handles. Until next week for part 2 of our education series. All the best.
All right. Thank you.